and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Pastor Gary Hamrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. What a great day to be an American. You know, when you look at American history, you can see God has been at the center of our nation since its founding in 1776. Consider some of the references to God in the Declaration of Independence.
Well, good morning, everybody. Kevin with Pellegrino Walk, and we are just looking at Pastor Gary Hamrick. And Pastor Gary is apparently senior pastor of Cornerstone Chapel, which is a large non-denominational church in Leesburg, Virginia, part of the Calvary Chapel network. And he's going to be speaking right now on the stage at Rededicate 250. And we want to dig into his teaching a little bit today. And boy, we want to really, this is a big one today, because we're dealing with issues of the Declaration of Independence. And we have a giant spectrum of belief here, right? So you've got some who are more traditional Orthodox, who are combining politics in the church and doing it in a lesser way. And then you have the Lou Engels and the Dutch Sheets on the other side that are absolute dominionists, out for power, out for glory, out for the financial, and out for absolute takeover. And today we happen to see someone who's in the middle of this somewhere, Pastor Gary Hamrick. And he's going to talk about the Declaration of Independence, and he's certainly saying that God has been at the center of the nation since the very beginning. I would say, what God? Which God? Because there's multiple gods that have been there since the very beginning. But he's also reading some things into the Declaration of Independence, and I think this is where the noble lie comes in. So Thomas Jefferson is definitely going to be quoted in Pastor Hamrick's speech, and this entire event reminds me of the Jefferson Bible. You know, just cut or paste whatever you want out of the Bible, because we got to make it fit into this American culture. I think Augustine did that when Christianity finally became the state religion of Rome, and he made it compatible to society. Well, in the same way, I think that's what's happening with Rededicate 250, is that we're making Christianity compatible with American society. That's a very, very dangerous thing to do. And I think that's the lesser part of what's happening here. I think the greater part of this is actually saying that we're somehow deified, we're a little God, we're going to take dominion, we're going to rule, we're going to take over completely, which we're getting from the NAR side of this thing. But back to Thomas Jefferson, he was frustrated by what he viewed as corruptions and contradictions in the New Testament. Imagine that. So he literally cut and pasted passages of the Gospels. And what he ended up compiling in the end was a new Jefferson's Bible, but it was actually called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. This idea was to kind of remove all the supernatural events and then focus entirely on Jesus's ethical teachings. And isn't that what we're doing here? We're kind of Christianizing America. I remember back in the 70s and 80s with Jerry Falwell, the moral majority, forcing morality upon a society when Jesus says we freely have the opportunity to accept him or reject him. There's something inherently wrong with that. So this Jefferson's Bible approach of cut and paste seems to be evident from the platform at Rededicate 250. So let's continue with Pastor Hamrick.
In the first paragraph, it speaks about the laws of nature and nature's God. Consider some of the references to God in the Declaration of Independence. In the first paragraph, It speaks about the laws of nature and nature's God. In the second paragraph, it reminds us of our unalienable rights that come not from government, but from, quote, our Creator. And in the last paragraph of the Declaration, it appeals to, quote, the supreme judge of the world.
And all this is certainly true. He's not saying anything that is a lie or a noble lie at all as far as the Declaration of Independence goes. But what's happening here is, again, a combining of the idea that the Declaration of Independence is somehow compatible with the Bible or with Jesus or the God of the universe. So during the time that Thomas Jefferson was actually doing a draft on the Declaration of Independence, the idea back then was to accommodate both Christians and deists or Christian deists in the same government. So any kind of official document like the Declaration of Independence would refer to God in a broad, more like Enlightenment rationalist terms. So you get wording like Creator, Supreme Judge of the world, Divine Providence, rather than specifically any kind of Christian name like Jesus. So, okay, you could stand on stage and you could proclaim this and say how Christian, how godly our country is. But here's where the noble lie comes in. By doing this, you're talking about two different gods. Clearly, the Christian God is different from the God of deism. Deism posits that God created the universe to run on natural laws. Obviously, that's why you're hearing things like this in the Declaration, but does not actively intervene in human affairs, far different from the God in the Bible that does. Benjamin Franklin was a good example. He believed in a creator and moral providence, but often skeptical about orthodox religious doctrines or Christianity. Now let's talk about deism for a second, because it was huge back then. So just the nature of God himself was transcendent under deism. In Christianity, he's both transcendent and immanent. As far as intervention, divine intervention, zero with deism, and with Christianity, continual. The source of truth, and this is interesting, with deism, human reason and observation of nature, again, the Enlightenment, rationalism at the time was pervading thought. In Christianity, of course, divine revelation, primarily through the Bible. As far as Jesus was concerned in deism, regarded only as a wise moral teacher. Christianity, of course, the divine God, Son of God, the God-man, the Word made flesh. As far as prayer's generally not practiced in deism, and in Christianity, it's central to the faith. With deism, as far as our human condition with sin, we possess natural reasoning and capabilities to determine right from wrong, whereas the Bible clearly says that humanity is fallen, sinful, and requires God's grace for redemption. I've said all that to say that describes two different gods. Not to mention we have a third one, which is the architect of the universe with the Freemasons, which a lot of these folks were Freemasons. And once again, let's talk about Enlightenment rationalism. In the 18th century, this movement asserted that human reason and logic, rather than religious dogma, tradition, or emotion, are the primary sources of knowledge and authority. It championed scientific inquiry, individual liberty, as we see in the Declaration of Independence, and the systematic questioning of established political and religious institutions. This was to improve human society. It seems like that's still something that we want to do as a part of this Rededicate 250 event, is improve human society. And as Christians, we've got to ask ourselves clearly, is that something that we do under the new covenant? Do we improve society? Do we make it more moral? Do we transform society? Is that our number one goal? Or is our number one goal to preach the gospel that people might have changed hearts through the Lord?
Finally, in the signatory line of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, all 56 appealed to, quote, divine providence as they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. This is an important day in our history. Thomas Jefferson once said, God who gave us life gave us liberty. But friends, if we forget God, we will lose that liberty.
Okay, Pastor Gary Hamrick again there. And of course, quoting from Thomas Jefferson and one of the most notable sentences or statements from the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There is such a danger in equating America's founding with Christianity. It all gets mixed together. Again, we are not biblical Israel, but it seems like we've tried to replace biblical Israel here in this country. And this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that they are rights. As Christians, we lay down our lives. And this idea of the pursuit of happiness, or the American dream, or even prosperity, as we mix those ideas with the Bible in the Jefferson Bible approach of cut and paste, everything gets mixed or gets taken out. So we start thinking as Christians, we ought to be happy all the time, or we ought to be prosperous all the time, or we should be free of sickness or pain or any kind of thorn in the flesh whatsoever, because that's God's desire for us. Absolutely not true. Psalm 144:15, happy are the people whose God is the Lord. We could say that happiness comes from Jesus. It comes from turning our lives over to God and being reconciled to Him. Proverbs 3:13, happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding. So with wisdom and understanding comes happiness, or even joy. And joy, of course, is a fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22. We know that that is a fruit of the tree of what God has done in our lives and in our hearts. It's not something that we pursue after, almost like an addiction. Matthew 16:26. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Jesus was trying to explain this idea of chasing after this stuff, whether it's happiness, whether it's the experience of some of the things that the leaders on the platform want to lead you into. It's all a part of this world. Our heart, our souls, our minds must be on Jesus and not on the pursuit of happiness. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:17, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding eternal weight of glory. That's not in the here and now. There are many on the platform during this event that want to tell you that it's about the here and now, that want to tell you it's all about this kingdom work that they can give you right now. And that's an utter lie. Pastor Hamrick goes on to say all 56 signers appealed to, quote, divine providence as they pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. This is an important day in our history. Well, let's for a second take a look at those signers. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence held a variety of religious beliefs, though the vast majority identified as Christians. While almost all adhered to the overarching Judeo-Christian moral framework, understand that, moral framework, and believed in a creator, their individual theological doctrines ranged from Orthodox Protestantism to deism, two different gods. So once again, this is a noble lie. This is an embellishment of the truth to get to an end of rededicating this country to God, which was not dedicated to the God of the Bible in the first place. So what I just read to you about the signers of the Declaration of Independence, of course, the majority identified as Christians. Well, let's look at today in America. Self-identifying Christians make up about 63% of the adult population. It's like when you're going into the hospital and you have to put your religious affiliation, or maybe it's on a voting document. You know, a lot of people would say that they're Christians, but that doesn't mean that they're truly Bible-believing Christians. Check out the denominational background of the signers, the 56 signers. 32 of the signers were Anglican or Episcopalian. Thomas Jefferson was one of them. 13 were Congregationalists. John Adams, Samuel Adams. 12 were Presbyterian. 3 were Quaker. 1 was Catholic. So in this spectrum, there were really three groups: Orthodox and devout Christians, theistic rationalists or Unitarians, and then deists. So you've got all these denominational categories, and then you got a spectrum of belief inside of that. So some were devout Christians, according to the more of the Reformed faith and Puritans and so forth. Many were theistic rationalists. So they adopted more or less an Enlightenment era reason into their faith. They believed in God and the fundamental teachings of Jesus, almost like Thomas Jefferson, but frequently rejected traditional dogmas like the Trinity or the divinity of Christ. Well, divinity of Christ, pretty big one, but yet we're saying that they were Christians. Some of the signers embraced deism as well, which we've already talked about, which posited that God created the universe to run on natural laws, but doesn't get engaged in human affairs, more like Benjamin Franklin. Despite their theological differences, the signers were unified in their appeals to a higher power in their foundational documents. But let's go back to what Gary Hamrick said about Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson once said, "God who gave us life, gave us liberty. But friends, if we forget God, we will lose that liberty." That's why this day is important. We have gathered here in our nation's capital, here at the National Mall, to rededicate ourselves and our country to God.
Okay, rededicating ourselves and our country. I could understand rededicating ourselves to God. Absolutely. Personally, individually, before the Lord, in the fear of the Lord. Absolutely. But rededicating America to God, again, we would say, which God? And truly, if we're quoting men like Thomas Jefferson, and here comes the noble lie again as we embellish the truth of this, he had deep contradictions. You know, besides being a universalist and a deist, he had glaring hypocrisies. He passionately argued for human liberty, equality, and freedom, while simultaneously owning hundreds of enslaved people, embodying the moral dilemma of his era. And if there was this giant moral dilemma of this era, then why are we rededicating to the same thing in our current era? So again, if you're going to quote Jefferson as referring to the God of the universe, if he's referring to Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, let me remind you, Pastor Hamrick, Jefferson is widely classified as a Christian deist. He believed in a creator who designed the universe and enforced natural moral laws, the moral laws and the natural laws that were actually in the Declaration of Independence that you read. But he rejected supernatural interventions like miracles, the Trinity, and the resurrection of Jesus. This is the same man that cut and pasted passages from the Bible just because he didn't like the supernatural interventions, like miracles. The things that he didn't like, he cut out. The things that he did, he pasted. It seems like that's exactly what we're doing with Rededicate 250. It seems like that's exactly what we're doing with the dominionist agenda that is coming forth in this platform. We have cut out the prophetic from the Bible, anything to do with Israel's future, anything to do with the ending that is clearly portrayed in the Bible. This is an ending that has to do with the apostasy of the church. This is an ending that has to do with Jacob's trouble in Israel. Well, let's just cut it out and let's create a new ending by taking the Old Testament typologically and saying, we're headed into the promised land. And let's just forget all that prophetic stuff. That's exactly what's going on today, folks. So we've cut out all that prophetic and let's paste in the typological Old Testament paradigm of coming out of Egypt, going into the promised land. Passover, we're headed to the Feast of Tabernacles. Presence is coming back to the temple. And here we go, folks. We're in Atlantis. We're in Utopia. The problem is, this is what the esoteric world is saying too. This is what the New Age is saying too. We're all coming into oneness. It's going to get better. The dissenters are going to be purged or silenced. Folks, we have men of God that have taught the Bible and lived faithfully for years that are buying into this agenda and turning. We need to stand for the Word of God. We need to stand for Jesus' words as he spoke them, the plain meaning of words. The Jefferson Bible approach of cut and paste that we clearly see evident on the platform of Rededicate 250, no pun intended, is not going to cut it. Jesus said, watch and wait. Have patience. Brothers and sisters, there's leaven in the lump, and it is growing exponentially day by day. We're speaking to you because we want to warn the sheep. Come out of these movements. Come to Jesus. Come back to Jesus. Stay in his word. This is a wide gate. Jesus said, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Rededicate 250 is a wide gate, brothers and sisters. Stay away from anything that looks like it. God bless you, and thanks for watching today.